We acknowledge that we are on the lands of Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we as beneficiaries of the treaty must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Mr. Mayor, we do not have a supplementary agenda this evening. Rules for the council chambers. The municipality of Chatham-Kent supports open meetings that welcome debate of public policy issues in an atmosphere of inclusiveness, integrity, civility, fairness, and respect for differing points of view. Anyone conducting themselves in a way that disturbs, disrupts, or impedes the orderly conduct of a meeting, interrupts or makes derogatory statements, or hate speech, defamatory comments about councillors, staff, speakers, or fellow members of the public may result in the removal of the premise. This also applies to deputations. We ask that you do not approach members of council if they are seated in their council seats. The public, unless invited, is not permitted to come into the gated horseshoe area. The use of posters, signage, and literature is also prohibited. Mr. Mayor, we have not received any disclosures of pecuniary interest, direct or indirect, for open session agenda items, and we have not received any deputations with regards to any of the reports this evening. Therefore, we'll move on to the consent agenda. This evening, we have two items that have been pulled from the consent agenda. Item 14A, the CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund Round 2 application has been pulled by Councillor Story and by Councillor Jubinville. And item 15A, Canada's Housing Plan and Local Zoning Requirements, has been pulled by Councillor Jubinville. Therefore, on the consent agenda this evening, we had items 13A, 14A, 15B, and 16A and B.
I'm going to ask that the MCs of the crowd move this and second it. Councillor McGregor and Councillor McDonald.
So moved.
And seconded.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Hall?
Yes.
And Councillor C. McGregor?
Yes.
Therefore, all votes are in, I believe. Hall, McGregor, oh, Councillor Doyle? Yes, okay, sorry, all votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 14, Chief Administrative Office.
14B, CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund Round 2 application.
Councillor Story and Councillor Jubinville, can I get you put on the floor, please?
So move, Mr. Chair. Oops.
Whoops, sorry, and I so second.
Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question to Michael and or Ray, and thank you for bringing this forward. When can we expect to hear more details about this in the public domain? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. I would expect that CMHC has any official public announcements regarding the HAF funding, that cities, municipalities that are receiving funding, their administrative teams would then be enabled to provide further details to council and to their communities. Our administration has not received information on exactly when such announcements would be made. However, any funding that the municipality of Chatham-Kent would receive from a successful application to the HAF funding would be provided in a future detailed information report to council.
Okay. Did they give us even a little hint, like in a month or a week? Any ballpark there?
I would expect in the near future, all the municipalities that applied for this funding will receive some notice.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jubinville.
Thank you, and sorry, Ray, that I didn't get to my questions beforehand. I'm not sure, I've kind of mishmashed these two reports, so I think this might be a question for the next report, because I'm not seeing it. Secondary and urban areas, I think that's a question for Mr. Jocks, but I can ask it when I put, yeah, okay. So if, well, first of all, I have a bit of an issue voting on something that everything isn't fully transparent. So we had some information, and then it was asked that it's not being released until the federal or the CMHA releases it. So it's hard to vote on something that isn't fully transparent. So is this something that do we have to vote on it tonight, or can we wait until the announcement is made? Like, why do we have to vote on it if everything isn't fully public and transparent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilor, for your question. So that's a fair question. I will say that everything related to our initiatives in the application are included in the report that was provided. So successful municipalities that do receive funding would have a contribution agreement that's attached to this. And I would also say that once municipalities such as Chatham-Kent that if successful in this funding would get an official announcement, then that would be provided in the fully detailed report, which would identify what amount of funding that we would receive and the terms of that funding in terms of how it would be paid out, whether installments, one time, et cetera.
Okay, but we don't know what that funding, so we're voting on something that we don't really know what the potential is.
So there is two different options for this application, whether these initiatives were brought to council at the time of the application for approval, or whether it was done at a later time. CMHC had a couple different options there. So all the information that is pertained in this report is the same information that was put in through the application piece.
Okay. So ultimately, right now, what we would be voting on is that we would be allowing 4 units to be on, oh, here it is. Okay, primary and secondary urban areas. So potentially, is there limits, or could every person that lives in an urban and secondary urban setting, could everyone end up having 4 resident or dwellings on their properties? Is this a potential that could be the landscape of what Chatham could look like?
I think I'll leave the planning and zoning questions
Okay.
to my colleague here, Ryan, to better define those.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So under Canada's housing plan, there have been a number of grant applications made available to Canadian municipalities. The Housing Accelerator Fund, as well as another grant opportunity, which is noted in the next report, the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund. These grants are available directly from the federal government to municipalities that can be put towards capital expenditures, such as the provision of affordable housing or growth-related infrastructure upgrades, such as major water and wastewater facilities, as an example. Since the federal government does not have direct control over provincial legislation, the federal government is offering these grants to successful municipalities in exchange for certain local land use planning changes. And one of those requirements for both the Housing Accelerator Fund and the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund is that municipalities amend their zoning bylaws to allow up to 4 residential dwelling units as of right on every fully serviced low-density residential property in the municipality. And that is it is a requirement of being ultimately successful for this grant, subject of this report today.
Okay, so essentially, it could happen. I'm sure it wouldn't, but there is a potential that if every person that lived in Chatham, so, sorry, the primary and secondary, what is the difference?
Yeah, so the primary urban centers are urban centers sort of over 2,500 people. So Wallaceburg, Dresden, Ridgetown, Blenheim, Chatham, Tilbury, and Wheatley. The secondary urban centers are generally those communities around 500 or less, and those would be Mitchell's Bay, Pancor, Merlin, Charing Cross, Thamesville, and Bothwell. So the changes in the zoning regulation, just add a small comment. In most urban residential properties today, zoning exists and has long existed, which allows more units than what currently exists on a built property. Over half the properties in Chatham-Kent where there's a single detached dwelling already permit a semi-detached dwelling. They already all permit 3 units as of right. And many of these rules have been in place for years. It's actually been about a decade since someone could add 1 additional unit in their house. And I think on an existing developed property, we're less likely to see widespread changes in our neighborhoods, although there may be that opportunity if the property is practical to do so. What I anticipate is that this change will give developers and home builders new opportunities in future growth areas where neighborhoods can be pre-planned to a higher density and a bit more homogeneous in the housing types throughout a particular neighborhood. But that does not discount the fact that, yes, to your question, any existing property that has a house on it today could add units within it, or in the event that that lot became vacant, provided the property was big enough to provide parking and a building big enough to hold these units, yes, they could. They would be able to redevelop with up to 4 units. Thank you.
Okay. So this might be in the one for the zoning, but, so let's just say hypothetically, a resident wanted to have 4 dwellings on their property. Would the neighbor have any, let's say he wanted to, and they're talking about up to 4 stories and above. I don't know, that might be in your report, but do the neighbors have any control of what would happen if a resident wanted to build 4 dwellings or wanted to build up to 4 stories on their property? Is there any control of the neighbors?
Just to clarify, the height of 4 stories is not part of this requirement for the Housing Accelerator Fund, but it is a requirement to allow up to 4 units. And like I said, today, every property is allowed up to 3 units today, but in the future, if Chatham-Kent amends its zoning bylaw to allow up to 4 units as of right, then there would not be a requirement for neighbor notification if any property owner chose to renovate or rebuild in such a way that happened. And there'll be a report that I'm bringing to council on January 27th with the proposed bylaw amendment. Unfortunately, given the timing of this meeting, I was not able to prepare that for tonight.
I'll just be honest, this scares me. It really does. I understand the spirit of this, but it does scare me. The potential, it would completely change the landscape of all of the urban centers. And I mean, or however much money they give us, I don't know what it's going to be, but it might be a drop in the bucket of what it would cost and the repercussions. But anyway, could you ever foresee any type of expropriation happening? You know, if we're allowed to have 4 dwellings, what's stopping? I don't know. I'm just thinking down the road. What happens, 10 years down the road, they go knock on somebody's door who lives on Charing Cross Road, nice 1-acre property, and say, okay, well, we're running out of space. We need some of your property. Like, is this going in that direction? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that through you, Mr. Chair. So the only people that have the powers of expropriation is the municipality. So municipality will always have that control. An individual does not have the ability to expropriate property. And one of the things, if I can, that might help, Mr. Jocks, perhaps you can comment on how long the right to have 3 units has been in place and how many we've seen as a result. You may not know the exact number, but I'm assuming people would come either to the building department or to planning asking questions. That's Mr. McAllister might be able to answer that as well.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So going back to around 2014, the provincial government changed the Planning Act to make it a requirement that 2 units as of right exist. So for about a decade now, say a single detached dwelling owner had the ability to add 1 unit. And it was in late 2023, the provincial government again amended the Planning Act to make it a requirement that up to 3 units as of right were permitted in every urban residential property. I don't know if Mr. McAllister has the numbers. I would suggest that in the last 2 years, approximately 40 houses have added 1 unit. I would say that is a fair ballpark estimation. And probably in the last 10 years, there's been about the same amount of houses that have added a single unit. That's been the uptake that we've seen from the building department.
Bruce, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Maybe just another point of clarification. I think, Ryan, you're pretty close, I think, on your estimate. We were just looking at, it's like 10 in the CIP program, but I know there's been others that, so it's pretty modest that we've had over the past 10 years. But I just wanted to maybe just clarify one point as well. I've just heard the term dwellings and dwelling units intermixed here. Just to clarify, there wouldn't necessarily be 4 individual houses, like on a lot per se. We're talking allowing units, right? So your apartment in a house, so potentially 3, and you could have 1 in an accessory building, potentially is how this would work. It's not like 4 individual densified dwellings on a lot per se. Hopefully that clarifies.
Okay. I don't really have any other questions. I just don't understand why they want this in place if we can already have 3. I don't see I just think there's a deeper agenda. I don't know what it is, but I probably won't support it. And I know I'll probably be unpopular by not supporting it, but I'm not comfortable with it. But thank you for answering the questions.
Councillor Doyle, followed by Councillor McGrail.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess my question would be if we go ahead with this and our application's been accepted and say we're into year 2, but we find something in the program or in what we've accepted that we don't like anymore, is there any way that we can get out of this program once we get in and like stop the funding, but say, hey, we're just done. We don't want to, we're going back to our old ways, I guess, or bylaws for how many units are allowed and that kind of thing. Is there any way to get out of this once we get in it?
Through you, Your Worship, I'd defer to Mr. Taylor because it would be the language in a contribution agreement. Typically, once you spend their money, you're expected to comply with the conditions. So it may be that over, I'll leave it to Mr. Taylor, it may be that over a period of time, there might still be the ability to back out of something, but I think a lot of it depends on the language in that contribution agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. So in general, I'd have to go back through the funding agreement that the province would, or the federal government would provide to us under this. But if you weren't to take, so normally what you'd see is conditions that have to be met in order for the funding to be done, certain commitments that we made. If you didn't do those, then you'd have to return the funding. But kind of if you did those conditions and then tried to roll them back later, you'd be in breach and you'd likely owe the funding back at that point as well. So I'd have to do a more detailed analysis of the individual agreement on this case, and I haven't had a chance to review it yet. But you know, if council were to return that, the risk would likely be returning the money.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess my only worry with this, and knowing that we are at 3 units for urban dwelling, it doesn't make it as bad, but with the amount of corporations that are buying homes and then turning them into rental units, to me thinking about my kids owning a house down the road, if the businesses can know they can buy a single duplex or a single dwelling house and turn it into 4 units in that house, now they're going to bid higher than anybody who's going to live in that house just as a single family because of the rental income. So down the road, 10 or 15 years, we're going to have more homes are going to be owned by businesses with small units in them as opposed to having your single family dwelling family homes. So that would be my worry, but we are at 3 already. So to add 1 more doesn't seem like a huge amount. That's why I was asking about what we do if we get out of it. So worst case, we have to pay the money back if it goes bad. Thank you very much.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff, through you. I just wanted the definition of what a unit is, because regardless if a unit within a home or within the property, there's still going to be setbacks and some bylaws there that need to be adhered to, right? You just can't build a unit in your backyard when your backyard's 10 by 10.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, so if the house on the property that exists today is, say, a single detached dwelling, and someone's adding a unit within it, say in the basement or an addition, that house still needs to meet all of the setbacks and coverages in the zoning bylaw as a single detached dwelling. When someone's adding a unit in a building accessory to their house, it would have the same required setbacks as, say, a detached garage. So there's a little bit of more leniency on the setbacks as the main dwelling, but the same setbacks and coverage as a garage would apply to that detached dwelling. These are zoning regulations that Chatham-Kent has had in place for a number of years, and the overall intent is that the basic built form of the property would be consistent regardless of how many units are actually within the building.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you. Apologies for not sending this question in advance. I think this may be directed to Ray or perhaps Jody as a question. But so I'm just wondering if it is our staff opinion that undertaking the initiatives that are outlined in this report, those 8 initiatives, if you think it will help contribute to housing affordability, increase housing supply, some of our goals around housing overall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilor, for the question. Yes, it absolutely is our opinion that this will help with the housing supply, as we need housing solutions across the housing continuum and all different types of housing, whether it's rental, affordable, market, et cetera. So if we receive funding to fund these initiatives, it'll absolutely help the community's housing needs.
And then just in follow-up, number 3 specifically spoke to enhancing incentives that accelerate the construction of affordable housing development. So obviously we don't know the details of some of that's under embargo still from the province. That's fine, or the government, sorry. But would that mean that we potentially could use some of these grant funds to offer those incentives, or would it just allow the infrastructure to create the program and then it would fall to Chatham-Kent taxpayers to pay those incentives?
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. We would be looking at using some of these grant funds to further incentivize our already CIP, like for our ADUs or additional dwelling units, to hopefully create more uptick to get more housing units in the community.
Great, fabulous. So I just want to say at a very high level, I know sometimes it's challenging if we don't see all of the small details of the programs or the funding that's offered. But, you know, after being missed in round 1 of accelerator funds, I think there was a lot of disappointment in being looked over as a community, knowing what those housing needs are. So I would just really hate for us to have this opportunity to really invest in housing and affordable housing, and for us to then pass that by. So I just wanted to point out that I think, you know, I appreciate some of the reservations that we've heard in the conversation, but the bigger picture for me is that we have some dollars that are not paid in Chatham-Kent dollars going towards affordable housing, and that's really exciting. So I look forward to seeing some of those details as we're able to share them.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Kaniff. Back to Councillor McGrail's question of what is a unit. This is maybe a little off topic, but maybe not. Are people able now to rent a room? I remember we went through the rooming house thing years ago, and I forget what the definition was. I don't think it was crystal clear, but as far as a unit, could I or Bob down the street, could he rent a room, like 4 different rooms in a home to 4 different people, or are there restrictions on that? So I'm sort of thinking, you know, student housing seems pretty wide open, but am I, like, do people have to have locked doors, access to cooking? I don't know. But are we able to, like, could I rent out 3 rooms in my home to 3 different non-related individuals?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yes, that's possible today. There is a provision of the Ontario Building Code that is based on the number of people living in a house, not necessarily the number of bedrooms, which changes the Ontario Building Code requirements after a certain point, where then the doors and other life safety systems in that house are required under the code. But that doesn't apply, for a 2 or 3 bedroom house. It would apply as you get more rooms in a house. I don't know what the threshold is in the Ontario Building Code, but there is a threshold.
Would it be based on square footage, like you're allowed 10 people per 1,000 square feet or whatever? Is that how it, well, and if you don't know, that's fine, I get it, but I'm just wondering if, could you cram in, 27 people into a house? Or there's a limit on that, like based on facilities?
I see Mr. McAllister, General Manager, Community.
But you guys can get back to me on this one, because this is getting a little off this report, but I am curious, but no,
I can just quickly, it's.
Okay, sure, thank you.
The way the building code reads, it's if there's more than 4 unrelated persons, then that triggers what Ryan suggested, upgrades to the home, if it's just gonna be rented as rooms. And maybe just to clarify the unit question, so when we're talking dwelling units, we're talking a self-contained unit that contains kitchen, bedroom, all the necessities like an apartment, right? So it's an individual dwelling unit versus just renting a room in a house. So I hope that provides some clarification, right? If you go above and beyond that, there's significant life safety issues you'd have to undertake under the building code if you're renting a big house out to a number of folks, more than 4 people that are unrelated.
So more than 4 unrelated is kind of the magic number. Okay, that's great. Thanks, guys.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Hall?
Yes.
Councillor C. McGregor?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-1.
Item 15, development services.
15A, Canada's Housing Plan and Local Zoning Requirements.
Councillor Jubenville and Councillor Allen, can I get you from the floor, please?
So moved?
Yeah, have a second.
Councillor Jubenville.
Thank you. I don't really have any questions. I just wanted it voted on separately.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor C. McGregor?
Yes.
And Councillor Hall?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-1.
Okay, we'll go to notices of motion. I got Councillor Wright, Councillor Sakachi, then Councillor Story. Over to you, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor John Wright, am putting this motion forward to discuss and debate this concern at the February 10th council meeting. Whereas the divestment of Clearville Park was proposed during the 2025 budget deliberations, and whereas this proposal divestment has not been communicated to the users of Clearville Park and surrounding area, and whereas other cost-sharing or revenue opportunities may be discussed once public consultation is launched, be it resolved that divestment of Clearville Park is deferred until a full consultation has been undertaken with the users of Clearville Park and surrounding area. Full cost recovery options are reviewed and presented to the users of seasoned lots of how continued municipal ownership and operation would look like moving forward with financial perspectives. A report to come to council in the spring of 2025 with options of full cost recovery options and divestment options along with any feasible partnership opportunities. Whereas a review needs to be done on the public park lands and the woodlot before divesting. Thank you.
Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor Anthony Sikachi, here provide notice that I'll be bringing the following motion for discussion and voting on the January 27th meeting of council. Where administration has received millions of dollars through successful grant applications over the past few years directly related to shovel-ready municipal assets used for developing affordable housing, and whereas all taxpayers of Chatham-Kent will be greatly benefited by successful funding opportunities that will enable more affordable housing developments to be created from other funding sources other than tax levy, and whereas administration has directed council in previous reports to submit expressions of interest when surplus properties are made available, such as school boards or other levels of government to purchase for housing opportunities. Therefore, be it resolved that council direct administration to continue to submit expressions of interest, if warranted, where surplus properties are made available, or to review privately available properties in order to undertake appropriate due diligence to determine if the property warrants consideration to purchase for housing opportunities, and if so, report back to council for further directions. Administration be authorized when warranted to complete an architectural pre-design, feasibility, and cost estimation for development of affordable housing options to maximize the number of units created that align with the result of the upcoming housing needs assessment and following a housing strategic plan. Administration also be directed to continue to seek out grant funding from upper levels of government for capital costs and potential partnerships for affordable housing options, and report back to council with these options for consideration as they arise. And administration to include the results of successful grant applications related to affordable housing developments, including both last term and this current term of council at the time of creation of the next Chatham-Kent Affordable Housing Development Progress Update Information Report.
Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hereby register the following motion for discussion and voting on January 27th, 2024. Motion regarding transparency and accountability for the Deputy CAO role, whereas it is the role of council to ensure the accountability and transparency of the operations of the municipality, including the activities of senior management of the municipality as set out in Section 224D.1 of the Municipal Act. Succession planning strengthens the overall capacity of an organization by helping leaders plan for the future, and that the organization continues to run smoothly and without interruption during and after staff move on to new opportunities or retire. Transparent decision-making processes are part of the foundation of good municipal governments. A deputy CAO role could be reasonably seen as a leading candidate for the CAO role if and when that role becomes available and the CAO role is hired by and reports to council. The deputy CAO role was not included in 2025 municipal budget discussions. Be it resolved that administration report back to Chatham-Kent Council with the following: job description for the deputy CAO, financial analysis and indicating how this position will be funded, comparators with other Ontario municipalities about whether or not they have deputy CAO roles, and Chatham-Kent Council via CAO Performance Review and Compensation Committee works with the CAO to review job description, participate in candidate interviews, as well as performance review and compensation for the deputy CAO role. Thank you.
Non-agenda business.
Councillor Story, you wanted to waive notice and vote on that this evening?
Actually, I thought about that and felt it might be helpful for administration to actually have time to report back to us so we could review it together, but thank you for double checking.
Okay, so to come back on January 27th?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Thank you for checking.
Sorry.
Non-agenda business. Seeing none, first and second reading. Councillor Finn and Councillor Anderson.
Happy to make that motion.
I'm so seconded.
Anybody opposed? Motion carried. Third and final reading. Councillor Harrigan and Councillor Sakachi.
So moved.
Seconded.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Resolution of Councillor. Councillor Hall, and I'll have Councillor McGrail wrap it up.
Thank you, Mayor. To his next meeting to be held on Monday, January 27th, 2024, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
So seconded.
Anyone opposed to wrapping up at 6:36? Seeing none? Thanks a lot, everyone. Happy New Year.